everybody. Welcome to a flip through of the Journey to the Overland 2nd edition rule book. Now, as some of you may know, I did a Kickstarter last year, second Kickstarter, to do a 2nd edition of my solo tabletop role-playing game, Journey to the Overland. And really the primary thing that was going to change in the 2nd edition was we were going to revise and expand the game rules. Now, I think the Kickstarter ended in March, around March or April, and it was pretty much successful. And pretty much, I'd say from probably March or April until about November, I worked on revising it and coming up with new rules. Now, when I first did the Word file, it was over 700 pages. Fortunately, in the layout, we were able to get that down to about 592 pages. So it is still 600 pages. It is probably one of the largest role-playing game rule books out there. Yeah, I think, normally, I think so far, just looking around, some of the largest I've seen are like 400 pages. Now, I will say, even though it is 500 pages, 600 pages, it is actually pretty quick and easy to get through or to flip through, which I will show you, because as you play the game, there are a lot of sections that you will skip until you get there, because there are scenarios in there and more or less spoilers. So, and that's kind of what makes it solo, that and the cards. The first thing I want to show you is the current edition of Journey to the Overland. So this is the current edition of the rule book, which I do like. And if you've never played the game, I would highly recommend you start with the current edition. And this is available on Amazon.com right now as the current edition. And the reason I recommend that is the basic mechanics have not changed, but there are a lot of expansions and additions to the rules and a lot more options and a few changes with, some of the basic mechanics. But if you're unfamiliar with the Journey to the Overland system, then you definitely want to start with this. This wound up being, what was that? I think that wound up being 169 pages. And again, there are scenarios in here, some of which are repeated in the 2nd edition because they apply to different locations. But if we were to put these side by side, as you can see, the 2nd edition is probably 3 times as thick as much content in that. So I mean, this is a huge expansion of the game. And the way I summarize it in the rule book when I explain is the 1st edition of the game was essentially it was more or less a type of board or map game like Barbarian Prince with role-playing game elements thrown on top of it. So for example, in Journey to the Overland, I added skills and different equipment and things like that really weren't in the Barbarian Prince. So it was essentially a board game type of rule book or concept with role-playing game elements, kind of bolted on top of it. What I have done in the 2nd edition is this is a role-playing game. Okay, this has now become a full-fledged OSR role-playing game. Now, it still retains all of the elements of the original edition as far as the map and the cards and everything that you need to play it solo, but now it has more in common with role-playing game elements and things you would normally look for or find. And a lot of this was done through comments, recommendations, but more importantly, just watching and really seeing what was out there now, what people were enjoying. I couldn't say there's one role-playing game that this edition is based off of, because it's not. But if there is something you're used to in a role-playing game, you will probably find it in Journey to the Overland 2nd edition now. Now, the way the 2nd edition is going to be released is anyone who buys the second edition game is going to get this rule book in their game, which is like crazy. So I don't know. Hopefully it won't bring the shipping up too much, or I may not be able to ship it overseas anymore. But if you buy the second edition game, just the core game, you will get this new rule book in there, because this is the whole new second edition. Now, for some of the backers and some of my previous backers, there is a hardcover edition, right? And this time they are both done simultaneously. So for the flip through, I'm only going to be looking at the paperback or soft cover, but I did want to show that the hardcover edition is done, just like the soft cover edition. I'm actually very impressed with it. I had entertained the idea of kind of keeping the original color and then just putting second edition under there. And I think I showed a prototype like that. But in the end, I decided to change the art and, you know, add the second edition, because I didn't want there to be any confusion as to which edition was which. So now anyone that sees this cover will know that they have the second edition. So, this is the hardcover. Now, I will show you this. So, if you look at the paperback version, which I've actually been working with because I'm still kind of going through checking for typos and maybe moving a few of the images around, because you will see there's a lot of images. And this is not going to be a page-by-page flip-through, right? Because, obviously, if you want it, you should buy the book. But what it is going to be is I'm going to kind of just show you the layout. And then I will be doing separate videos in segments on the actual rules. And I will be discussing sections of the rules and things that have been added. And then eventually I will start doing playthroughs or play sessions, which I'm really looking forward to. I just haven't decided whether I'm going to pick up with a character I had or just do a whole new. I'm actually thinking of kind of doing both. Kind of picking up with a character I had and then doing a new one. Now, when we open this, as we open the first edition, you will see there is a table of contents, which, I mean, obviously, that's kind of one of the most sought after things that role players, and I guess even board gamers look for, although I guess in board gaming is more standard. But there is also an index, right? And the nice thing about this index is it is a curated index, meaning I've actually taken the time. Oh, sorry about that. I've actually taken the time. I was trying to enlarge it for you. I've actually taken the time to go through and make sure that some of the, some of the more pertinent topics are indexed. Unlike an index where if you just let the computer generate it and it kind of comes up with a lot of random stuff, this index should have definitely anything that's been added new, and then kind of the main things like objectives and so forth like that. Now, one of the things I do like about the hardcover, other than of course it is a hardcover, is if you open the hardcover, right, it lays flat. And this is great. So if you are playing at a table, you're playing by yourself or you're playing with some friends, this lays perfectly flat. So you don't have to worry about it closing on you. The soft cover, not so much. If you're using the soft cover version, you're going to have to kind of dog ear it a bit after a while to get it to stay flat. I mean, it will eventually, lay open, once you get enough pages done. But it doesn't lay as flat as the hardcover. So I guess the last thing I'm going to do is just kind of go through a few sections to show you the layout of the book. And another thing I did was I actually went through from the first edition and I moved around the sections so that they made more sense. So unlike in the regular edition, what actually happened was when I first designed the game, I would just bolt new rules onto the rule book as I thought them up. So they wound up kind of not being in order. There were things like you might have an objective at the beginning of the book, and then something about the towns, and then something about eating, and then something about the towns again. And so what I did in this rule book was I moved all of that stuff around and kind of grouped it. So it'll be a lot easier to kind of find what you're looking for. I also added some lore on the world of the Overland, which is what this section, Principalities and Powers, refers to. This is going to discuss the lore of the Overland. And this is lore that I have actually had for quite a long time, but I've never actually sat down and memorialized it in print. So, and that's what is going to occur the first time. This is a section on the dragons, where I discuss the nature of dragons in the Overland. And then we see here you have beginning play. And so this, I don't even know how many images are in here. I mean, there's probably at least 300, I would say. A lot of this is what they call copyright free art, as well as my own commissioned art, which was the only way I could get this many images. I've also got some shots of the chance cards, so I explained the cards in the game, which I don't think I had a chance to do in the first one. There might have been that page, but might not have been as much. The supplies and equipment table has been greatly expanded. So there's going to be a lot more supplies and equipment that you will be able to get and use. And there's also images now for the supplies and equipment. There is a new optional encumbrance rule. So in the first edition of Journey to the Overland, you had to keep track of your weight and how much weight your character was carrying at any given time. In this edition, however, you can use the optional encumbrance rule, which basically is going to rely on slots, right? You're going to be allowed so many slots for weapons, so many slots for items. There is the animal section, which somehow got left out of the first edition, and I had to do an errata. So that has been put in here. There's a short section on strongholds, simply because I know that's kind of a popular topic now. So I did create some section rules on strongholds. The experience table has been updated so that the numbers or the points are a little bit different. I'm not going to say it's actually easier now to get more experience points, but I just think the way it is now, you're going to be able to do a lot more with your experience points when you get them. This is an interesting section. This is what I call the new NPC companions, and this was not in the original edition. So in the NPC companions are going to be new things now, new characters that you can buy with your XPs when you reach a certain skill level. So for example, if you buy the Warden skill, which used to be called Wizard skill, you can pick up an apprentice as an NPC companion. And basically the apprentice will travel with you as an NPC and, you know, help you release wards or cast spells, as they say in other games. The Rangers are going to be able to get animal companions. So then there's a section on NPC characters. There's a few new NPC characters. Like in this edition now, I introduced sailors and marines because the ship section has been expanded as well. There's a new section on swarms. And swarms is going to be kind of a expedited way of dealing with like large groups of insects and creatures. There is a section on unprovoked attacks, which is going to talk about if you encounter a character that doesn't attack you, but you choose to attack them and, you know, steal their items, there's going to be consequences for that. The table of known diseases, ships and sailing, attacking towns. There's a new mutiny table, which I didn't have before. So now there are new rules if you do get a ship of your own, that there is a possibility that you could have mutinies occur on your ship. This is the section with the ocean encounters, so you are going to want to skip over all of that until you get to it or you roll it. There is also a new thing on traveling on rivers and river encounters, and this is just a short table on resolving encounters on the river, which was not in there before. I don't even know if you could travel on rivers before. Maybe, but I don't know. But now there's actually a section on traveling in rivers. The combat section has been completely revamped, and this is the only section I'm kind of nervous about, because I am not exactly sure if these are all going to make sense when it's time to use them. I mean, they make sense to me, obviously, but I'm not exactly sure if they will translate well with players. But I will see. I'm not going to try to do any kind of errata or anything right off the bat. But there is a big difference. It's not a different style of combat of how you work it out, but it is more options now in combat. So for example, now there are critical hits, which I didn't have critical hits before. So again, and these are all concepts that are normally in role-playing games that have been added. The fist fighting rules are still here. The weapons tables are pretty much the same. I didn't really change much of the weapons. There is a slight change in armor now, where you can wear cloth armor and certain leather armor underneath your metal or plate armor. So that'll give you a little more survivability when you can afford that. There's some NPC morale rules which are new, which will basically deal with certain NPCs that may run away during combat. There's a very expanded or huge alchemist herb table, which are new herbs available to alchemists. A lot of the skills have been updated and buffed, especially the thief skill. The thief skill now has kind of your traditional role-playing options such as pickpocket, lock-picking, disarming traps, hiding in shadows, backstabbing, and fencing. There's more. The Thieves Guild has been expanded now, so you can take assignments from the Thieves Guild. But in addition, being in the Thieves Guild will also help you if you get locked up. So there's now a procedure where if you have Thieves Guild and you do get arrested and you're a member of the Thieves Guild, you're probably going to get out, right? The Thieves Guild kind of takes care of its own. The merchant section has been expanded so that now there are what we call merchant specializations. So as a merchant, for example, you can specialize in jewels, ancient documents, and a few other things. But if you do get items that you specialize in, you will make more money. The minstrel skill has been updated so that minstrels now kind of have more of a magical effect like you see in role-playing games. And these are called charms. So that minstrels will now be able to attempt certain charms as part of their skill. Healer skill, I don't think healer really got much of a buff. Assassin skill is pretty much the same. Fighter is kind of the same. Barbarian skill has been... There's a slight buff in the barbarian skill, but mostly it's just been kind of organized better. And it's kind of been broken down into the various extremes. Of all your tanks, if you want a tank in this game, you play a barbarian. I'll tell you that now. The berserker skill, this is another rule section that there may be some problems with. And when I say that, is some problems with how players implement it. And mainly it's going to do with what happens when your character goes berserk. Because it might be a little confusing, but it's the way I wanted to do it. I didn't want going berserk to be something you could just turn on and off. But at the same time, I wanted it to happen enough to be useful, but not so much that it would be overpowered. Clerics got a slight buff because I think clerics now have an ability called Turn Undead, which was not in the original rules. But again, this is kind of a trope in role-playing games. So I did create a rule for turning undead. There's a table now for certain types of creatures if you encounter them as NPCs. The Rangers got a huge buff. Basically, the Rangers now have some slight first aid abilities. They have more tracking abilities. They can access certain alchemist herbs. So, I think at one time I thought the Rangers had got the biggest buff, but maybe they didn't. Maybe it was Thief. Admiral, not much change there. Wardens, there's a new thing with wardens now where wardens can actually create scrolls. And what a scroll will now do is allow a warden to basically prepare a ward or a spell, hand it to somebody, another player, as a scroll, and that player can release it depending on if their wisdom is high enough. And it's a one-time thing. But again, that is an RPG trope that I decided to put in here. The spy is actually kind of interesting. I like the spy. Some of it is not changed, but I kind of retitled it or recaptioned it. So now with spies, you have things called infiltration, intel, where a spy can get intel, disguise, double agents, concealed weapons, tips. So the spy is a very interesting character that I'd love to play, but I probably won't. The new skill. Now, the only new skill in the skill category is gladiator. And there's always been an arena, but there's never been a gladiator skill per se. So the gladiator is kind of an interesting fighter because the gladiator basically, his whole advantage is gladiators will do well in certain types of fights against certain types of characters. So they have what are called preferred enemies, and they have what are called known as preferred stances, right, that they're able to take. And obviously they have buffs if you decide to fight them in the arena, being that they are gladiators. Gladiators have an ability to disarm their opponents. So for example, they can choose what's called the close quarters fighting style, the overpower and overwhelm fighting style, or the arena tactician. So that's an interesting one that I would love to make a character to be a gladiator, which I just want to do all of them. Now this is also a whole new section in 2nd edition, which is called traits. And traits, what I decided to do with traits was, really in the game, the only way to improve your character was to basically purchase skills. But some skills automatically mean you can't purchase other skills. So for example, I think like a knight can't have thief skill, right? Or a barbarian can't have a warden skill, and vice versa. So what traits are basically little pieces of skills or abilities that normally may come in another skill, but individuals can purchase them as a trait even though they can't purchase the skill. Now they're not identical. But say if you're a warden and you can't get barbarian or fighter skill, but you want to improve your ability in combat, then you could buy something like a thrust trait, right? Or you could buy the elusive trait, right? So these traits will kind of help you in areas. The dodge trait, that your own skill kind of prohibits you from normally being proficient in. So I'm interested in how they're going to work out. And these are going to be purchased with part of your XPs to spend as well. So that way, you may have 15,000 XPs to spend, but you can't afford an advanced skill, which normally is like 20,000. But you might be able to buy 4 or 5 of these traits. Now, normally, I think you can only own 3 at a time, but that's just an example. Disadvantages. This is something also new. You could probably use this as an optional rule, but I decided to write it in. And what disadvantages are going to be is if you take on a scenario, like you visit a town or a castle and you have an audience and the king gives you a scenario and you fail that scenario, you do not complete it, you are going to have to come back here and you are going to have to roll for a disadvantage, right? And basically that's kind of an indication of your self-confidence going down, or maybe it's kind of you learn more about yourself, like you're just not able to do certain things, or just in general your people's impression of you changes. Now you can get rid of disadvantages. You can pay to get rid of them with your XPs to spend, or there's other ways you can get rid of them, I think, with certain successes. So for example, this disadvantage here is called allergy, superstitious, fear of animals, indecisive, exiled, frugal. So there's a lot of, they're kind of quirky disadvantages. They're not necessarily related to whatever scenario you failed, but they're kind of related to your character. Now, another one of the huge things which really accounted for the biggest increase in the rule book is all of the town sections now have basically their own individual section on that town. So before, if you went to a town and say, for example, you wanted news and information, you just wrote on the news and information table. There was one news and information table in the whole rule book. Now each town has its own news and information. Each town has its own tavern, including some towns that didn't have taverns before. But more importantly, each town has its own reason that you would go visit it. So now you're not just going into town so that you're off the road. You can actually head to a specific town for a specific reason. So, for example, in Milesteel, there's now the new blacksmith skill that you can go to Milesteel and learn to become a blacksmith. In addition, since most humans start at Milesteel, there's now a rule that gives you free food and lodging at Milesteel if that is your hometown as a human. And that's huge, because one of the things that people kind of didn't like in Journey to the Overland was they tended to run out of food and lodging, and you know, as soon as you get outside of a town, you had to go back to buy more food, but then you couldn't really afford to stay there because of the lodging. Now, if you are in your hometown, you will get free food and lodging, because it is assumed that you have family there, you have a home there. And so when you are in your hometown, which for most characters, if you're human, will be Milesteel, you will get free food and lodging. Zafton, if you visit Zafton now, for example, you can learn the Mariner skill, which is, and these aren't skills that can be purchased. These are skills that can only be learned in these towns, although you still pay XP for them. And the Mariner is basically kind of a seafaring merchant, a merchant that uses the seas. If you go to Wood Dam, you can have special siege equipment and engineering items built. You can attend the School of Archery there. If you go to Future Town, you can purchase advanced technology, or you can visit the alchemist shop, where alchemists can now pick up some of the traditional alchemist items that you see in role-playing games. Some of the tropes like lightning rod, smoke stick, astral globe, flare, stuff that most RPG guys would expect alchemists have access to. Another thing I like that I added with Future Town is called coach rides. So now if you go to Future Town, these coaches have a schedule where they leave the town and arrive in another town, and you can pay to ride the coach. And so basically the coach has a guard or constable as well as a driver, and it gives you some protection and some speed if you're going to these specific towns. Now the coach doesn't service every town, and it doesn't come back, but you can ride it there. Igloo has this sweet thing called the Arctic Expedition, which is kind of like an Iditarod that takes place once a year that you can participate in. In addition, if you go there, you can learn survival training, right? You can go to Igloo, which is like a frozen town, and you can pick up survival skills, which will minimize your disadvantages in like harsh terrain like deserts and swamps and snow and ice. Morsh Monastery, you can now go there for things such as blessed weapons, you can take mass, you can receive baptism, and all of these things will have their benefits, as well as there's certain relics that if you are an adventurer, you can stop off at Morsh Monastery and try to pick up some of these relics that will help you. So for example, there are these things called might boxes, which basically are kits designed to defeat certain types of NPCs. So this is called the Vampire Hunter's Might Box, the Werewolf Hunter's Might Box, and I think there's like a Witch's, Warlock Hunter's Might Box, and an Undead Hunter's Might Box. So those are pretty cool. Dwarf Town, I think Dwarf Town, there's like this little bric-a-brac table you can roll on, as well as the Dwarven Sagas, which is great for minstrels, because these are very powerful charms that a minstrel can be trained in if he goes to Dwarf Town. Then there's King's Harbor, which in the first edition, King's Harbor was on the map, but it was not a playable town or location, and now it is. one of the significant things about visiting King's Harbor is it's the first place or the only place you can actually join a guild. So wardens can go there to join the Wardens Guild. Pirates can go there to join the Pirate Guild. And, you know, these guilds are not easy to get into. Right? So I'll tell you that right now. Like the Pirate Guild, for example, you either get admitted or you get killed. Or you're going to have to fight for your life if you don't. So they're not easy to get into, but they have some unique benefits. For example, the Pirates Guild has what are called gunworks. So if you join the Pirates Guild, you will get access to their inventory of guns. And as well as different things like you can pick up the Buccaneer skill. So the only way to become a Buccaneer, though, is you have to be a member of the Pirates Guild. So then we get back into our town activities. One of the things I did here was on the hire help table. I added a couple of things which should help characters. So, for example, I added surgeon or surgeon. So now if you are taking wounds and you don't have a healer, you can try to hire a surgeon in a town. And I added local guide, which will help if you are getting lost. And I added workers, which was oddly enough, the last game there was a result that said you need so many workers to repair a ship, but there was really no explanation of where you got workers. So I've done that now. We have to seek an audience table, the section on warrants, the section on getting arrested and going to jail. This has been changed a little bit now because I've kind of formalized more how you would post bond if it's available when you're in jail, as well as I formalized if you want to attempt to bribe the constables, because that is an option to try to bribe them. You know, the rules for trials is pretty much the same. I kind of redid the sentencing table so that it kind of flows from worst to best. Before it was kind of mixed up, and I had done that on purpose because I didn't want people to think, well, if you roll high, you always know it's going to be good. Now, pretty much, yeah, if you roll high, it's always going to be good. So that's kind of your town section. This would be your news and information for all your different kingdoms and places that you visit. Again, you don't want to look through this until you get a result, because there's all of these pictures correspond to scenarios. So all of this is scenarios. Right? And then you have taverns, and all of the taverns now kind of have unique features. A few of them, like Milesteel's Tavern, is the same. That's kind of your brawling place where people are fighting. Wooddam Tavern, they have some like things like arm wrestling, caber tossing. Future Town Tavern has like this kind of cool, weird out museum of tech that kind of went bad, or tech that never worked. So there's a guy that keeps a museum of the tech in Future Town. Some of it you can get, some of it you can just use while you're there, kind of like a amusement park ride. And then there's some other taverns. I think King's Castle Tavern. Yeah. But again, you don't want to read through these things until you get there. I mean, else you're spoiling your own game. There's a new thing called carousing, which is kind of cool because what carousing will allow you to do now is, say you are in a town and you cannot afford lodging. Well, if you go visit the tavern and I think you have 1 or 2 drinks, you can just spend the evening carousing. So you just walk around all evening basically getting in trouble. You can also wind up getting arrested and going to jail, but the way that carousing works is, if you're jailed for carousing, you're just going to be held overnight. And that will actually be of a benefit to some classes, skill classes, because some of the guilds require that you have been jailed before. I think the Thieves Guild and the Pirate Guild, you have to have served some time in jail to get into those guilds. Well, normally you don't want to go to jail on purpose because you could wind up getting tried and getting executed or, confined for life. Well, if you use carousing, you can get jail time, but they only ever hold you overnight. So again, that is kind of a fun thing to add. I think I got here like Buccaneers, Thieves, Barbarians are the main ones that benefit from carousing. I expanded the magic for the town magic. So a lot of the towns, I gave each town one new magical trick. And then I added the ones for King's Castle and King's Harbor, which I don't think had it. Neither did Dwarf Haven. So they now have their own form of town magic that you can study. And then we get into the audiences with NPC mayors. Again, these are all town specific. These are all spoilers. So you don't want to read this stuff. You want to keep going past this until you actually have an audience. Right? And that's why I say you can get through the book pretty quick. So once we get through the audiences, there's a section on wars, which most characters might not ever get to, depending on how high up you get. But so there's information on the units that are available, and these counters are going to be included for the backers who got the the all-in or whatever I called it this turn. But it explains how the counters work. It shows the troops results table. It shows you an example of sieging a town. And there's different rules in the game where they do come into play. So, I mean, it's not just attack on like a different game. It is part and parcel of the actual game. I think in order to like defeat the King Overlord, you have to have troops. So this is some information on strategic locations, the Bane Forts, the Blue Bridge. Most of that is the same. I just kind of added some more lore and information. We have the other realms, which is the same thing we had before. So you will have the Dragon's Home. In the other realms, there's Yeti Mountain. I think that's pretty much the same. Dead Man's Ditch, the Unknown Islands. I don't think they change much. The Overland Arena. Not much change. Knighthood did get kind of a change. I clarified some of the rules. And in addition, now you can purchase Paladin skill. Yes! Now this is my favorite probably new skill that I added. Is the skill for Paladins. And I love the way the Paladins work. So the Paladins have this thing called Grace, which they can expend to activate certain powers during combat. So for example, this one is called, let me see if I can get a good view. The Lord is my shepherd. Power from on high. Let's go. Come on. Whoa. Sorry about that. In combat healing, I will cover thee. Aura of righteousness, to whom much is forgiven. Then there's Paladin oaths. The oath of St. Michael and St. George. I smite thee. Touch not my anointed one. The appointed time and place. The wages of sin is death, and the blood in thy veins. So, I mean, those are some very, very thematic, skills or benefits that the Paladins will be able to unlock. And Paladins do have, like I said, an ability to do some in-combat healing. Now, one of the cool things about a Paladin is, which is to whom much is given. Now, what this says is a Paladin may not flee or evade from combat if doing so will leave another member of the Paladin's party who is still alive behind, even if they are unconscious. Any Paladin that does so will immediately lose their entire supply of grace permanently and may not replenish it. So basically, as a Paladin, you cannot leave a comrade behind. Even if they fall unconscious and you want to escape, you cannot leave them. But doing so will basically remove you from grace. You will lose all your grace, and you will lose the ability to generate any more grace. So you will be a Paladin, but a Paladin in name only. The Dragon Slayer section, pretty much unchanged. I went in and clarified some things, cleaned up some rules. Samurai section, again, pretty much unchanged. I kind of added a table for the samurai equipment, which wasn't in the first edition. And then one of the requests I had was to do an order of monks. And there were kind of monk NPCs in the game, but I had never defined them as a class. So now there is a whole section on if you want to become a monk. And monk training is all about humility. So there is humility of mind, humility of body, humility of action, humility of time, humility of space, humility of self, humility of will, and humility of soul. And these are all various tests that you must pass in your monk training. But basically, if you acquire monk skill, you obviously will get unarmed combat expertise, as well as access to a few weapons. Like the monks can use the bow staff, the nunchuckers, the G-dial swords, and I think that's it. Obviously, monks are also kind of like priests or healers. So in order to be a monk, you must have healer skill, which is another reason now that people will have to pick up healer skill. This is new. It's called the Barbarian Clans. So if you become a barbarian now in the game, you can choose to join a clan, and there's two. There's the High Lion clan, and then there is the Great Bear clan. And what joining a clan will do, though, is if you join a clan, you will receive a stigma and a geas. And basically, a geas is a personal prohibition which you cannot break. A stigma is your clan's prohibition. So if you join the High Lion clan, their stigma is they may never travel on ships. They don't travel on ships, right? Now, what gears you choose is there's a list here, which you have to pick one. So you might say you're never going to wear armor. You may never eat named meals. But by joining the clan, you also gain access to what are known as resistances, which if you play role-playing games, people would be familiar with. So, for example, the High Lion clan, they have a resistance to bladed weapons so that they take less damage from bladed weapons than normal characters do. I think the Great Bear clan has a resistance to animal or creature attacks. So they take less damage when they are attacked by any kind of animal or creature. But their stigma is they can never ride a horse. They hate horses. And then you're also required once a month to roll to see if you must fulfill a duty for the clan chief, which may require you to return to your ancestral homeland and carry out this mission or this request for your clan. And so those are just kind of some scenarios for that. The Pathfinder section is pretty much the same. Fire Castle, this is new. So you can now enter Fire Castle. And there's a procedure if you enter it, whether it's inadvertent or not, as to whether or not you are going to be in prison. If you are in prison, there's a thing on prison conditions, on whether or not you are, a bounty is paid for you to be released, or whether you are rescued or ransomed, or whether eventually you could be killed. But there's also a possibility where you can conduct business with the Wizard Mordecai, because there are some encounters that will involve going to Fire Castle and trying to deal with the Wizard Mordecai. This is this new section called the Realm of the Titans. Most people will not play with Titans. They're kind of like a world-breaking mechanism in the game. But I decided to put them in here. I started not to, but I decided to put them in here because they were so integral to the lore that I decided I was going to throw them in, and they will probably be more scenario driven or supplements, meaning in future supplements I may use the Titan. So I wanted to put them in here, but you could use them on your own. There's some rules on if you release the Titans. Like the Titans have access to their own wards, or which are their own basically spells or powers. And then there's rules on if you release them, what happens, because they start wreaking havoc. And then to conclude everything, I have a new random NPC characters, which you really don't need with the game cards. But, you may want to roll up some random characters. And there are one or two of the new scenarios will tell you, hey, these are random characters. So, but right now it's just in here. I just wanted to put it in the rules in case I used it later in some supplements. And then random NPC monsters. And again, you would probably not need this on a regular basis because you encounter most monsters through the game cards. But there are a few scenarios already that will say roll on the random NPC monsters table to see. So we have like hordes of rats, giant spiders, goblin archers, spearmen, swords, orc swordsmen, a giant, a troll, a skeleton. And also they kind of just give you my stats for them in the game. If you're doing your own scenarios and you wanted an idea of kind of what they would stat out at and what their specials would be, then they're kind of in here. This isn't a bestiary, but it's kind of the beginning of a bestiary, which I am thinking about doing. Once I complete all the supplements and things, I would like to do a Journey to the Overland bestiary. There's something I could put out by itself. And then there is a section on party bonds, which is just kind of some theme or flavor you can roll for. I do a little more clarification on nightly quest, where I kind of explain the different types of quests that you will do, so that you kind of know when you pull a quest card. There is an optional section on going through the Darkman's domain, where you can encounter certain creatures that are unique there while you're traveling. You don't have to use this because it could make the game a little hard, but there's things like the Black Hounds of Destiny, native Overlanders, that's pretty much where they reside now, the Black Banshee, Bat Swarm, Night Goblins, Living Shadow, Swarm of Snakes, Strange Weather, and then there's something called the Dullahan, which is basically the Headless Horseman. Actually, the Headless Horseman myth comes from the myth of the Dullahan. He is a version of the Dullahan. And then there is a small section on optional NPC AI rules, which are like all the rage now ever since Kingdom Death and Gloomhaven. People want some kind of AI. So if you do want to use AI in a battle, you can now come back here and I kind of lay out what the logic of the NPCs would be at certain stages in the battle. I probably would not use this in most games just because I just kind of like to keep my games moving and keep everything intuitive. But if you are the type of person that you like for there to be some AI, then you have it laid out here. This might get tweaked again. This is something if I start hearing a lot of feedback that, hey, this isn't working right, or I get to this point, I don't know what to do, then I might tweak that. But for now, I think it'll help people who want it. There's a glossary of common terms, not a lot, but just a few. There is also now, and this is one of the things I'm really glad I did in the second edition. There is a color copy of the full map. There's a color copy of the world map. There is all pages of the original character sheet. So now if you want to copy another page or whatever, it's right here in the book. And there is a copy of the Overland Arena template that says here you photocopy it at 150%, and you can play that without the separate one that is given to like the stretch goal backers. But this way everybody can do the Overland Arena. And I've done some videos showing how this works. It's actually pretty fun. And then that's the index. And so basically everybody, 48 minutes and we got through 600 pages. So like I said, I may do some future videos where I talk more about each section in a little more depth. But I hope you guys enjoyed that, especially all my backers who I really appreciate making this possible. I am so stoked. I have, like I said, I have made a few changes and typos and cleaned up. So the ones I have here are not final. I have to send these back, or basically send the files back and then get those done. But once I get those back, I mean, I will be ready to, you know, move into the next phase of the campaign, which is essentially going to be kind of getting out the supplements. But for backers that don't have any supplements, if you've just got the core game and then you maybe have the hardbound rulebook, whether you paid the upgrade to switch from the soft cover to the hardbound, or whether you're getting them both, then a lot of you guys might be getting some kind of emails with the shipping cost. I am thinking of shipping these separately, simply because if I ship them separately in the US, they can go media mail. So even though this book is like this thick, it would only be maybe $5. But if I ship the whole game priority mail, then it would still probably not be any higher, because priority mail is kind of capped. It's kind of capped at the price, regardless of the weight, if you can get it in the box. At least that's the last time I heard of it. All right, everybody. Woo, that was a lot. Take care. God bless.